In this tutorial, we'll learn how to create the look behind system from Outlast on both right and left sides. If you want to learn more about Unreal Engine 4, how to make games using it and all types of game development related stuff, start right now by subscribing. Lastly, big shout out to all the patrons that support me this month. And now let's get into the tutorial. We are going to start things off in the first person template. For me this is basically the default one, but what I did was to delete everything that I didn't need when it comes to input, such as gamepad and touch input, and then in a viewport I deleted all the weapons, VR controllers and whatever else there was. I only have my camera. There's currently no mesh, but this works with a mesh as well. As long as you set up the camera properly, there should be no problems with having a mesh as well. So let's go to edit, project settings, and now let's go to input and set up an input action. Right here, click on the plus sign. Let's have here look behind. Okay, and let's have two buttons, one Q and one E. Q is going to represent the left side and E is going to represent the right side. Kind of like it's done in FPS games with picking. Let's get here look behind. Okay, and from pressed what we'll do is to get in a boolean. I'm going to call this look is looking behind. Okay, and I'm going to set this to be true. Then as well from release I'm going to set this to be false. And one thing I'm also going to do is to go to the movement input and then go to move right. And here what I'm going to do is to have a branch. And as long as it's looking behind is false, which means we are looking forward and not behind, we will be able to move to the right and to the left. Why is that? Because it's kind of very hard to move to the right and to the left while looking behind. You can even try it yourself, right? And usually in games you don't really want me to be able to do this because the perspective is going to get messed up. Okay, now let's go on and set here, set use controller rotation yaw. This one is going to be false. Okay, and now here we are going to have a sequence. And before this sequence, what we'll get is set global time dilation and set this to 0.5. So basically, once we are going to press Q or E, we are going to have a slow motion, but we don't want this to be on the entire period of looking behind. So from then 0, we are going to get a retriggerable delay with a duration of 0.4 and set the global time dilation back to 1. So after 0.4 seconds, this is going to be set to 1. But as well, after releasing the button, we are going to set it back to 1. Because sometimes we might release the buttons faster than 0.4 seconds. Okay. And of course, this is more of an effect, so it looks a little bit better. But if you don't want it, you can just remove this port. Okay. Then let's get the first person camera. And from then on, we are going to set use pawn control rotation. Then we are going to get control rotation and we are going to promote this to a variable. So let's call it initial controlled rotation. I misspelled it. Alright, and by the way, I'm going to explain this after we are done with a little bit more of code here, and then I'm going to explain everything and why we do that. Okay, then get a camera, get relative transform, and let's promote this to a variable as well, initial transform. Okay, and one more thing that we have to do is another boolean. I'm going to call it e/q, and then what I'll do is to go to key, get fname, get name actually, then to string, and I'm going to check if this is equal to q. Make sure it's capital Q, because the name is going to be capitalized. Okay, and then based on that, I'm going to set e/q. Let's go over this one more time. First of all, let's start with this boolean. Why we want to check if the name is equal to q is because we have only two options for the key, q and e. If it's q, that means that this is going to be true. If it's e, that means that it is going to be false. And based on the name here, as you can see, E, Q, right, a boolean has two states, false and true. E is going to represent the false part, and Q is going to represent the true state. Right? Now let's get over this as well. Let's first start with use controller rotation yaw. Let's go in the first person character and let's disable that real quick and let's see what happens. So if now we are going to press W, you can see we go forward, S backwards, and A, their respective positions. But now if we are going to rotate the mouse, let's say to the left 90 degrees, and we are going to press W, you're going to see that we are going to go to the right and not forward. And if we are going to press S, we are going to go back, that means to the left. If we are going to go 90 more degrees and we are going to press W, we are actually going to go backwards and not forwards. And so this is basically what it does. And when we are going to use this in the system, basically what that means is that even if our camera is going to rotate, we are still going to keep the same forward vector for the movement no matter where we are looking, right? Because basically we are going to ignore the yaw of the control rotation. Okay, and then for use point control rotation, if we have this to true, then we're not going to be able to rotate the camera through blueprint, only through input, right? So by doing this, we make sure that we can. The next step that we have to do is to once again copy this part with first person camera and get relative transform, paste it in here, and now let's promote this once again to a variable, and I'm going to call it final transform. And we can even move it upwards. Okay. The reason that we create a new one is because we will need to make good use of both transforms, both the initial and the final one. And now before continuing with any other code, let's go real quick to the viewport and we will need to create some scenes. So basically empty actors. Let's take a look at the camera's position, 10, 0, 64. Let's go again in the scene and set the Z to 64 so it's on the same height. Okay. Now let's move 15 units to the right. That will be minus 15 on the Y. And we are also going to move this a little bit backwards. Disable snapping. Okay. Let's also add a camera, which we are going to delete later, but first we will need to see how this is going to look. Okay, now let's rotate it. And you can do it however you want. I like to go with minus 130 degrees. And then I also like to go a little bit downwards. Okay, let's compile and let's play. And now you can currently see how it looks. But you can't really see the difference between the first one and the other one. But it doesn't really matter right now. We have an idea of how this looks. We can go even down. Okay, let's delete the camera, let's copy the scene and paste it one more time, and now what we'll do is to reverse some of these values. So instead of minus 15 on the Y, we'll go with 15, and then instead of minus 130, we'll go with 130, so the positive value. And now the same thing is going to happen on both sides, but with opposite values. Okay, now let's go back to event graph, and now we are going to add a timeline. This one is going to be called lerp. You can call it whatever you want. We're going to play, not play from start. Let's go to float. I'm going to call this alpha. And let's add two new keys. The first one is going to have time 0, value 0. And then the other one time 0.5 and 1. And if you wonder how this is going to help us, it's basically going to act as alpha for a lerp. Okay. Now from the set final transform, let's go to reverse. So once we release a key, your cue, this timeline is going to reverse, which means that the camera is going to go to its initial position. That's why you have to know this value right here. Okay, let's go to direction and get a switch on a time and direction. Now from update, what we'll do is to get first person camera. On forward, we are going to set relative transform. Okay, and the new transform is going to be, we are going to work on it based on an is node. So is, plug the result in the new transform. The is function is going to be the sign in and out. The alpha is going to be the float track. Now we have to see how we configure A and B. For A, we are going to get initial transform, plug this in B, and then for B, from B, what we'll do is to get a select. Okay, from return value we are going to get relative transform. We can't currently do that. Let's first plug in option 0 and option 1 the scenes, and then from return value get relative transform and plug this in B. Okay, and now what we have to do is to plug in the index e/q, which is going to transform into a boolean. So now this is where e and q helps us. Once again, e for false, that means that scene is going to go on the right. Let's make sure that happens. Okay, so if you go from this side, you can see that the scene with no number goes on the left side, which means that this has to go in true, and scene 1 goes in false because it has to go on the right. Compile. Now this should be it for the update on forward. Let's copy this part of the code and plug that in backward. Okay, same function, the alpha again. Now let's copy this as well. Actually, no, we don't have to. In A, what we are going to plug is the final transform, and then in initial, we are going to plug. In B, we are going to plug the initial transform. Okay, I think we can test it to see how it looks. You can currently see what happens. Let's try on the other side as well. But currently there is a problem. We have to switch these two from final transform to initial transform. Final transform goes into B, initial goes into A. And now when we let go of the key, this should go back to its initial position. So you can see it happening on both sides, but there are currently some errors. We cannot use the mouse. So we'll have to reset all these sets on the first person camera and use control rotation neo as well. So let's copy them. Okay, and we are going to get another switch as well. From finished, direction goes in selection, and then we are only going to do these things on backward, because once it's finished we don't want to reset these. Okay, so make sure you set this to true. Now we will need to get controller, get player controller, set control rotation, and the control rotation is going to be the initial control rotation. Plug this in new rotation. Okay, and now let me explain. So this part right here is kind of self-explanatory. We are going to go backwards. So from backward, we are going to go back to the initial position of the camera using these two transforms. The reason that we go from final to initial, right, even though we have final in B and initial in A, is because we are going to reverse this from 1 to 0 instead of 0 to 1. So by starting at 1, we are going to start with a final transform and then go back to initial transform. Okay, this part again pretty easy to understand. We go from the initial transform because we start at 0 when we play, and we go to scene 1 or normal scene, right? Their relative transforms, and then once we go back, when we release both E and Q, we reset all these variables, and then we also set the control rotation to the initial rotation so we don't get any errors and weird stuttering. Let's check this. Let's press E, we go backward, you can see this looking very nice. Then if I press Q, same thing happens. And then if I'm going to press E and move the mouse, nothing is going to happen. And I'm going to go to the initial rotation. I'm going to unplug this from here, compile and play. Then I'm going to press E and start rotating my mouse. You're going to see some stuttering once I let go. As you can see, right, this is not what has to happen. And so by setting the control rotation back to initial rotation, all these things are going to be avoided. And that's everything that we have to do in Unreal Engine 4. If you have any questions regarding the tutorial, let me know down below and I'm going to help you out. If you want to learn more about Unreal Engine 4, how to make games using it, and all types of game development related stuff, start right now by subscribing. Big thanks to Donald Anderson, Kamasutra Industries, Daniel Moore, Bruno Gomez, Stefan, Badr Al-Kahtani and Roduk for the support this month. As always, the project files will be available for Patreons over Patreon. Thanks a lot for watching until the very end, and I'll catch you in the next one.